From your local election headquarters, this is Big Country Politics on KTAB.
Welcome back to Big Country Politics, here with the Director of Public Works, Greg McCaffrey, for the City of Abilene. Of course, thanks for joining us here. The Master Stormwater Plan comes with a price tag. People always want to know, we have a new street fee on our bill right now. What could this mean for Abilenians? Sure. So one of the options in trying to implement these capital improvement plans is, how are you going to fund it? And one opportunity is obviously a slight rate increase to your current stormwater monthly bill or fee that you receive as part of your water utilities bill. That's one option. The other is for the city to seek other funding opportunities, be it bonding a number of projects, seeking out any kind of state or federal dollars that are out there for stormwater improvements. The unfortunate thing, there just aren't a lot of those dollars out there right now, and they're very competitive. Although we feel we've got one project in the Elm Creek drainage area that may be a good candidate to seek as far as some federal assistance as far as in that. So there's no question, anytime you do significant capital improvements, they come with a cost. Surely the intent is to try to maximize the way we spend those dollars and deliver the best product that we can. And obviously, if you spend money on stormwater, you're going to try to improve the way that system functions. You said there are three different options that you guys are looking at, right? So there's one that happens over 10 years, which obviously increases the rate by quicker, right? So we had three scenarios that were presented to the City Council back in October as part of this master plan. And each of those scenarios outlined a number of years to implement the prioritized stormwater capital improvements. And so the scenarios we had were basically a implementation time frame of a 10, 20-year, and 30-year program. That being, if you were to look at the 30-year program, is that monies would be generated through a rate increase, and the rate increase would be minimal, but then again, the number of improvements or the projects themselves, they would be completed over a 30-year program versus, say, scenario one, which was to try to complete all those projects, those same projects in a 10-year program. The scenario that was given would have been a rather substantial rate increase over a 10-year period. Now, is this something that council can approve, or does this have to go further than that, like to vote? So I would suspect that it would be treated similar to the way that the last stormwater fee as far as increase was adopted. My understanding is that was voter approved. Surely there's no question council weighs in on this before it's brought forth. And I think they had some reservations as far as with all three of the scenarios because of some other projects and programs that have been undertaken recently. There's a number of water utility improvements that are occurring, so people have recently seen that being implemented as far as a water utility rate increase that we're in the midst of, as well as the most recent one you just mentioned, the street maintenance fee. I mean, those dollars are earmarked specifically for street maintenance, and as those monies get accumulated, then we'll be pulling projects together and putting those projects as far as out on the street and getting them constructed and hopefully getting various roadways improved. So there's other things that are creating pressures when city and elected officials, when they start to consider rate increases. Right. So, obviously the number one priority on that list was the Elm Creek thing. How many homes does that affect here in Abilene? So the study showed that directly there's approximately about 5,300 residential homes that would be impacted should that Elm Creek diversion project go forward. Now that's an approximate number. There's a number of commercial businesses that are within that drainage area that would be affected, but so there's a rather significant number of residential units that, should that project go forward, that would directly be impacted as far as the way that they see the number of, I want to call it, floodwaters that come as far as up into and around their homes during significant rain events.
No, I think it's in the proposal as well, in the document. Could those people alone pay for it without people who aren't affected? They could be zoned into that?
Well, that was one of the items we've sort of discussed in a preliminary sense, is could we break out as far as different drainage areas. I can say that myself, I'm familiar with that, working in other states where they've instituted as far as call it arm charges or drainage district charges related to specific individuals. I think that's something we definitely have to research further with the city's legal department and definitely look at various state statutes as far as for compliance on us being able to do that here in Texas. But I do know that, like I said, in other states that I've worked in, that kind of option has been undertaken rather successfully.
Okay. I want to close out an ETA on this. It was accepted late last year. ETA, kind of where we are exactly.
Well, so I think where we're at is the city council has acknowledged and accepted the master plan. They've acknowledged the fact that there's a significant number of capital improvement projects that need to be undertaken. They also, I think, tentatively have accepted that at some point there will need to be a stormwater rate increase. The question is really at what is that amount? I think they've also sort of charged staff to come back and look at the scenarios that were presented and then come back before them with a modified program that will still accomplish many of those problem-prone areas. I think that I think there's going to be some discussion here in the 2020 budget, hopefully as far as in a positive sense, in moving that forward. I would say, time frame wise, before one would realistically start to see any kind of capital improvement projects moving forward, I think you're probably 3 years out or more. And that's really provided as far as that the city council is in concurrent as far as being able to come to an agreement as far as on some kind of rate adjustment.
All right, very good. Mr. McCaffrey, thank you so much for joining us. Big Country Politics continues right after this.